Lena sat by her bedroom window, the soft golden light of the late afternoon spilling across her desk, and she hugged her notebook tightly as if it were a shield against the emptiness she felt inside. The quiet house around her amplifying the hollow spaces in her chest, the silence pressing on her like a weight she couldn't shake, and yet, somehow, the loneliness was comforting too, a reminder that she could be alone with her thoughts, with the dreams and fears she didn't share with anyone, the longing that had been growing quietly for weeks, months even, the kind of longing that makes your heart ache without any reason. And she stared outside at the garden where the leaves were turning gold and red, imagining a life full of laughter and warmth. A life where she wasn't constantly measuring her feelings and hiding the tremors of excitement that came whenever her older brother James appeared in her mind. The thought of him making her pulse quicken, though she tried to tell herself it was only family affection, a natural closeness, nothing more, but deep down, she knew her feelings had begun to blur into something she didn't have a name for yet. Something new that was frightening and thrilling at the same time. A dangerous sweetness that lingered at the edges of her thoughts. And as she tried to focus on the words in her notebook, her pen moving across the page in messy, hurried lines, she couldn't shake the sense that the air in the room had shifted, the quiet suddenly feeling heavier, as though it were holding its breath with her, and she heard a faint creak, soft but deliberate, and froze, her eyes darting to the door, convinced it was only her imagination playing tricks. A random noise, a coincidence, yet the feeling in her stomach told her otherwise, a fluttering, nervous energy that made her heart beat faster. And then the door opened slowly, just a crack, and she caught a glimpse of James, standing there in the doorway, hesitant, uncertain, and everything she thought she knew about him, the strong, confident older brother who always had a joke ready, the one who had guided her through childhood with quiet patience, seemed different in that moment, softened, vulnerable, real. And her chest tightened with a strange mixture of relief and anxiety as he looked at her, his eyes lingering, searching for something, and Lena felt herself caught off guard, a sudden wave of emotion washing over her, making her forget the notebook, the sunset, the quiet room. Everything except the presence of him in the doorway, the warmth radiating from him, the subtle intensity in his gaze that made her aware of every small movement he made, the way his hand rested lightly on the doorframe, as if anchoring himself to reality. As if he was as nervous as she was, though he would never admit it, and she wondered what had brought him here, what words might fall from his lips, whether this moment was ordinary, a simple visit, or something more, something significant that she wasn't prepared to face. And when he spoke, his voice soft, careful, almost hesitant, asking if he had startled her, Lena felt her throat tighten, the small syllables vibrating with a tension she couldn't ignore, and she shook her head slightly, murmuring a quiet no, even though her heart was racing and her mind was spinning, and she felt the familiar, bittersweet ache of emotions she couldn't yet name, the confusion between family love and the flutter of something deeper, something almost forbidden in its intensity. And for a moment they simply stood there, frozen, the room shrinking around them, the sunset casting long, golden shadows, the world outside disappearing as if time itself had paused. And Lena's eyes followed him as he took a tentative step inside, careful, measured, yet drawing closer, the air charged with unspoken words, memories of laughter, shared secrets, and moments from childhood flooding her mind, and she felt a pull, an invisible thread drawing them together, something delicate yet irresistible, something that made her feel both safe and exposed, vulnerable in ways she had never allowed herself to feel before. And she remembered the times he had been there for her in silence, the small gestures, the unspoken support, the comfort of his presence when words had failed, and now, standing so near, she realized just how much she had missed him, how much she longed for that connection in a way that was no longer innocent, no longer simple, and she could sense his hesitation too, the careful restraint in his movements, the way his gaze softened as he looked at her, as if he too was aware of the shift, of the fragility of this moment. The delicate balance between familiarity and desire, and Lena's chest tightened again, her fingers clutching the notebook, her pen forgotten, the words she had tried to pour onto the page meaningless compared to the reality of him standing there. And then, as if sensing her inner turmoil, James took another step, closer this time, the warmth from his body reaching her, the faint scent of his cologne, the ordinary smell that now seemed extraordinary. And Lena felt a shiver run down her spine, a mixture of anticipation and fear, and in that instant everything else faded, the sunset, the quiet room, the life outside the window. And it was just the two of them, suspended in a fragile, unspoken tension, an unexpected moment that neither had prepared for, a moment that would linger in her mind long after it ended, shaping feelings she didn't yet understand, feelings that were complicated, confusing, and undeniable. And as she looked up at him, trying to find the right words, to explain the whirlwind of emotions inside her, to capture the longing, the admiration, the sudden vulnerability that seemed to ripple between them, she realized she couldn't, not yet, not without shattering the fragile bubble of connection that had formed in this unexpected instant, and so she simply stayed still, letting him be there, letting the moment exist as it was, full of promise, full of unspoken meaning, full of a quiet electricity that neither could ignore. And as the light outside slowly dimmed, painting the room in dusky shades, Lena felt her heart race, a mixture of hope, fear, and a tender longing that she had never experienced before. And James finally broke the silence with a small, almost imperceptible smile, the kind that said more than words ever could, and in that smile, Lena saw everything she had been feeling mirrored back at her, reflected in his eyes, in the way he lingered just inside the doorway, a presence both comforting and electric, a presence that left her trembling, thinking, imagining, longing, and knowing, deep down, that nothing would ever be quite the same again after this unexpected, quiet, intimate moment. When her brother had walked into her room, James leaned against the edge of Lena's desk, the soft light from the window casting a warm glow across his face, and for a moment, they both just looked at each other, the air thick with a tension neither had ever felt before, a mixture of comfort, longing, and curiosity that made the room feel smaller, more intimate, and Lena's heart pounded in her chest as she realized that this was more than just a casual visit, that the closeness she had always felt with her brother was shifting into something new, something fragile yet undeniable. And as she fiddled with the edge of her notebook, pretending to focus on her writing, she caught herself stealing glances at him, noticing the way his eyes softened when they met hers, the small crease in his forehead when he concentrated, the subtle warmth of his presence that seemed to seep into her skin. And James, in turn, was watching her carefully, aware of the subtle changes in her expression, the way her lips twitched when she thought no one was looking, the way her fingers danced nervously over the notebook, and he felt a surge of protectiveness mixed with something he didn't understand, a strange, unfamiliar pull that made his chest tighten and his thoughts scatter, and the room seemed to shrink further as the quiet hum of the house settled around them, the ticking of a distant clock marking time they both felt slipping away, and Lena's mind raced, filled with memories of shared laughter, whispered secrets during late nights, and small acts of care that now felt like tender echoes of a bond deeper than either had fully acknowledged. And she remembered the countless times James had been there for her, supporting her silently, noticing when she was sad or anxious, giving her the space to grow while somehow never letting her feel alone. And now, as he stood closer than usual, leaning slightly with his hands resting on the desk, she felt the weight of all those moments converge into a single, dizzying realization that she was seeing him differently, that her feelings had changed in ways she hadn't expected, that the warmth she always associated with safety and family was twisting into something richer, more complex, and slightly forbidden in its intensity. And she could sense James feeling the same. The way his body seemed hesitant yet drawn toward her, as if each step closer carried an invisible force neither could resist, and for a heartbeat, the room was silent, except for the faint rustling of papers and the subtle sound of their breathing, synchronized in a rhythm they weren't aware of but that somehow tied them together. And Lena swallowed hard, her fingers gripping the notebook tighter, trying to anchor herself, to hold on to the familiar while feeling the pull of the unknown. And James, noticing her tension, offered a small, reassuring smile, the kind that carried unspoken meaning, the kind that said he understood without needing words. And Lena felt a shiver of anticipation, a thrill that made her cheeks warm and her pulse quicken, and she realized that this simple, quiet exchange held more weight than any conversation they had ever had, that in this room, at this moment, they were both on the edge of something new, something neither fully understood yet, and she wanted to reach out, to bridge the invisible gap, to acknowledge the emotions simmering beneath the surface, but fear held her back, the fear of ruining what they had, of misunderstanding what this closeness meant, of crossing a line she wasn't ready to name. And James seemed to sense her hesitation, taking a measured step back, giving her space while still lingering close enough that the electricity between them remained palpable, and the tension wrapped around them like a living thing. Delicate yet persistent, and Lena felt a sudden urge to speak, to confess even a fragment of the feelings swirling inside her, but the words tangled in her throat, replaced by a soft, almost inaudible sigh, a sound that seemed to communicate everything she couldn't say, and James leaned a little forward, tilting his head as he studied her face, his gaze gentle, patient, curious, as if he was waiting for her to find the courage to let him in, to share what had been locked away in the corners of her heart, and for a brief, suspended moment, time slowed, the outside world fading into shadows as the two of them existed solely in this charged space, bound by unspoken understanding, unacknowledged desire, and the fragile thread of trust that had carried them through years of sibling intimacy and now teetered on the edge of something entirely different, something tender and terrifying all at once, and Lena could feel the ache of longing rise in her chest, the pull of emotions she couldn't yet define, and she realized that what she felt for James wasn't simple affection or admiration, it was more intricate, layered with the weight of history, shared experiences, unspoken words, and secret dreams, and James, in turn, felt his heart stir with emotions he had tried to rationalize, to dismiss as fleeting, only to find them growing stronger, more insistent, demanding recognition, and neither spoke, because words might shatter the delicate balance, because saying too much might ruin the suspended intimacy of the moment, and Lena's eyes flickered toward the notebook on her lap, a futile attempt to distract herself, to focus on something safe, something tangible, while James's gaze remained fixed on her, steady, unwavering, full of a warmth that made her shiver, and the quiet of the room deepened the sensation, magnifying every heartbeat, every shift in posture, every subtle glance exchanged, making it impossible to ignore the tension, the emotions brimming just beneath the surface, and Lena felt herself leaning slightly toward him without realizing, drawn by the invisible pull of familiarity mixed with something new, a connection that transcended ordinary sibling affection, something delicate, fragile, yet undeniably real, and James noticed, his eyes softening, his lips parting slightly as if he too wanted to speak, but neither dared, the risk of revealing too much, too soon, hanging between them like a fragile thread, and the air seemed to hum with anticipation, carrying memories of laughter, moments of shared silence, the comfort of long drives, late night talks, and quiet evenings spent in the same room yet worlds apart, and now, in this single, intimate moment, all of that history collided with present longing, making the room electric, charged with possibility, and Lena felt a tear prick her eye, a mix of fear, desire, and awe at the intensity of her own feelings, and James, noticing the change, reached out instinctively, a hand hovering in the space between them, unsure whether to touch, to retreat, or to wait for permission, and Lena's breath caught, her heart hammering, as she realized that this simple gesture carried more meaning than words could capture, and yet, just as the tension reached its peak, a distant noise, perhaps the wind rustling against the window, perhaps a creaking floorboard, reminded them of the world beyond the room, and they both flinched slightly, the moment suspended, delicate, unresolved, and Lena realized that this encounter had shifted something fundamental, that their relationship had changed in ways neither could ignore, that what began as a quiet visit had evolved into a charged, intimate experience, an unexpected collision of past familiarity and present emotion, and she understood that there was no turning back, no pretending that nothing had shifted, and James, sensing the same truth, gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod, acknowledging the unspoken bond forming between them, the shared understanding that something new, complicated, and deeply emotional had begun, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the room, Lena felt the weight and thrill of anticipation pressing on her, her mind spinning with possibilities, fears, and desires, and she knew that they would have to confront these feelings eventually. But for now, in this quiet, suspended space, they simply existed, two hearts connected, two souls aware of the fragile tension, the delicate line between love, longing, and the deep affection that had always defined their bond, and in that moment, Lena understood that this unexpected closeness, this subtle, electric intimacy, was the beginning of a journey neither of them fully understood yet, a journey filled with emotion, longing, and the quiet, powerful force of hearts beginning to see each other in a way they never had before. The next day, Lena couldn't stop thinking about the previous evening, replaying every glance, every slight movement, every small smile that James had given her, and the memory of him leaning against her desk. The way his presence had filled the room with warmth kept her awake with a restless mixture of longing and confusion, her mind spinning with questions she didn't know how to answer. And as she went about her morning, the sun filtering gently through the curtains, she felt a flutter in her chest every time she imagined him, each recollection sharper, more vivid, and impossible to ignore. And when James later arrived to help her organize old photographs and papers, their conversation started casually, light and easy, but beneath the ordinary words ran a current of unspoken emotion, subtle tension that made the air between them thick with meaning. And Lena noticed how he lingered on certain images, how his eyes softened when he spoke about the memories captured, the laughter and moments they had shared, the small family trips, birthdays, long summer evenings, all of it, and she realized with a jolt that each image, each memory, carried more weight now than it had before, as if the past itself had shifted in significance with the awareness of the emotions simmering beneath their interactions. And as they sorted through the albums, James reached across to hand her a photo, their fingers brushing, a brief, electric contact that made Lena's heart skip, and she quickly pulled back, cheeks flushing, aware of how intensely aware she had become of every little touch, every glance, every subtle shift in tone. And James, noticing her reaction, gave a small, apologetic smile, his eyes carrying an intensity that made her pulse quicken. And Lena tried to focus on the task at hand, rearranging the photos, moving them from piles to boxes, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying their last moments together, the unspoken tension, the warmth, the sense of something unacknowledged, hovering between them, fragile yet powerful. And as they continued, she realized she was staring at him more than the photos, noticing the slope of his shoulders, the way his hair fell across his forehead, the subtle curve of his lips when he smiled, the way his voice softened when he spoke to her, and she felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to say something, to admit even a fragment of the thoughts swirling in her mind, to confess the mixture of longing, confusion, and affection that had taken root and grown stronger over the past few days. And James seemed equally aware, his movements careful, his posture relaxed yet attentive, eyes flicking to her often, as if trying to read her thoughts, to gauge the meaning behind her every glance, every hesitation. And Lena realized that the dynamic between them had shifted, subtly but unmistakably, that their bond, once defined by familial comfort, had taken on a new dimension, tender, complicated, full of emotion. And she felt a thrill of both fear and anticipation at the realization, the knowledge that they were standing at a threshold, the edge of something neither had named, yet both sensed. And she found herself stealing glances at him when she thought he wasn't looking, noticing how he sometimes seemed lost in thought, a distant expression flickering across his features, as if he, too, were wrestling with the same emotions she could not articulate. And then, as they reached the end of the pile of photos, James paused, holding one up, a small smile on his face, and said softly, "Do you remember this day?" Lena nodded, her voice barely above a whisper, and in that simple exchange, the room seemed to grow warmer, more intimate, as though the memories themselves had drawn them closer. And she felt a sudden rush of courage, a desire to speak, to break the silence that had become so loaded with meaning. And she took a deep breath, ready to say something, anything, that could give voice to the emotions she felt, the emotions that had been building like a tide, rising and falling in her chest, threatening to spill over. And just as she opened her mouth, James's voice cut through gently, hesitant yet firm, "Lena, there's something I've been meaning to tell you." Her heart jumped, the anticipation, the nervous excitement, the fear of the unknown, all converging at once. And she looked at him, waiting, caught in that moment between fear and hope, between wanting to hear and fearing the answer. And James hesitated, searching for the right words, the courage to articulate the feelings he had been trying to understand, feelings that had crept up unexpectedly, quietly, until they could no longer be ignored. And he continued, voice low, almost trembling, I think I've been feeling things I didn't expect. Things I don't fully understand." Lena's chest tightened, a shiver running down her spine, as the weight of his words sank in, validating the turmoil she had been wrestling with alone. And in that instant, the air between them seemed to pulse with electricity, charged with emotion, a fragile, delicate tension that neither could deny. and she realized that this moment, simple as it seemed, was monumental, a turning point, a threshold of unspoken truth and new possibilities, and she wanted to speak, to say that she understood, that she felt the same, yet the words seemed inadequate, fragile, incapable of carrying the depth of what she experienced, so she nodded instead, letting the silence speak, letting the tension linger, heavy yet intimate, drawing them closer without a single further gesture. And James's eyes softened, a mix of relief and vulnerability crossing his face, a mirror to her own emotions, and they sat there, quietly, surrounded by photographs, memories, the remnants of shared years, and yet the present moment, the charged intimacy, seemed to outweigh them all, the history giving context to the present, but the present holding a promise, a quiet, fragile promise that something new could emerge, that they could navigate the complexity of their feelings together, carefully, cautiously, but authentically, and Lena felt tears prick her eyes, a mixture of awe, excitement, and fear, the realization that what she had felt alone for so long was mirrored, acknowledged, understood, and James, seeing the subtle glimmer, smiled faintly, a small gesture, but one that carried reassurance, recognition, and tenderness, and she returned the smile, a soft, hesitant curve of her lips that mirrored the tentative hope in her heart, and for a few minutes, they simply existed in that shared space, the room still, the world outside fading, the only sound the rustling of photos, the gentle rhythm of their breathing, and in that stillness, they both felt the magnitude of the unspoken connection, the delicate tension, the emotions simmering beneath the surface, emotions that were now impossible to ignore, and Lena realized that she no longer wanted to, that acknowledging them, feeling them fully, was part of the journey, part of growing closer, part of exploring the fragile, beautiful complexity of human emotion and attraction, and James seemed to understand this too, his presence steady, patient, aware, and she felt the pull of trust and closeness, the deepening bond that had always existed, now tinged with the thrill of possibility, the excitement of navigating something new, something uncharted, something that neither fully understood yet that they could feel in the marrow of their bones, the heartbeat, the warmth, the subtle brush of skin against skin when their hands accidentally touched, and the realization that this was only the beginning, the start of something complicated and tender, a story that would unfold slowly, carefully, with moments of hesitation and revelation, laughter and quiet reflection, and Lena felt the surge of emotions, the swell of longing, the tender ache of attraction, mingling with the familiarity and safety of their shared history, creating a delicate, fragile, yet undeniable intensity, and as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the room, James finally spoke again, softly, almost as if afraid to shatter the moment, "Lena, we don't have to understand everything now. We just have to be honest about what we feel," and she nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek, a mixture of relief, hope, and quiet exhilaration filling her chest, and they sat together, side by side, hands brushing now and then, a warmth spreading between them that had nothing to do with the room, and everything to do with the bond they were beginning to acknowledge, the new layer of emotion and understanding that had crept into their relationship, delicate, complicated, beautiful, and as the evening deepened, they realized that the past had led them here, the present was theirs to hold carefully, and the future, though uncertain, felt full of possibility, anticipation, and the gentle, fragile thrill of hearts opening to one another, quietly, softly, with hope and longing, and in that room, surrounded by memories, Lena and James discovered the unexpected truth of their connection, the richness of unspoken feelings, the intensity of subtle attraction, the beauty of emotional intimacy, and they both understood that life had shifted, gently, dramatically, irrevocably, in a single, tender afternoon of shared memories, glances, and the courage to begin speaking truths that had lingered quietly, unacknowledged, until now, and they would carry that day, that moment, forever, a turning point in their hearts, a step toward a future filled with emotion, longing, connection, and the delicate, beautiful tension of something new and deeply human unfolding between them. Days passed like a slow, lingering melody, each one stretching with a quiet intensity as Lena and James navigated the unspoken tension that had begun to weave itself into their lives, the memory of the previous afternoon lingering like a warm shadow, coloring every glance, every word, every movement between them, and Lena felt the pull of anticipation with every step she took, the subtle electricity in the air whenever James was near, The way her chest tightened and her heart raced at even the smallest interaction, while James himself seemed equally aware, caught between the comfort of familiarity and the thrill of emotions he had never fully understood before. And one rainy evening, as clouds gathered and the sky darkened, Lena sat in her room reading by the soft glow of a lamp, the pitter-patter of rain against the window a soothing rhythm, yet her thoughts were anything but calm, swirling with memories of stolen glances, shared smiles, and the warmth of his presence, and she could feel the ache of longing growing stronger, a mixture of hope, fear, and the undeniable pull of emotions that neither had yet named fully. And then a gentle knock at the door made her jump, her heart lurching in anticipation, and James stepped inside, his hair damp, water droplets clinging to the collar of his shirt, a small umbrella in his hand, and even in his ordinary, simple appearance, he radiated a presence that made her chest tighten and her breath catch, and he offered her the umbrella with a faint, nervous smile, their fingers brushing briefly in the act, sending a shiver down her spine, a mixture of excitement and fear she could not deny, and the room seemed to hold its breath with them, the rain outside fading into a backdrop as if the world itself had paused, leaving only this charged, fragile space between them, and Lena felt the urge to speak, to confess even a fragment of the emotions that had been building for days, weeks even, the longing, the tender ache, the subtle thrill of attraction that had grown quietly but insistently, and James, noticing the change in her expression, took a small step closer, careful, measured, as if every movement mattered, as if the weight of this moment demanded gentleness, and Lena felt a mix of fear and exhilaration, the awareness that this was more than just a visit, more than casual conversation, that something tender, delicate, and profound was unfolding in real time. And she tried to steady her breathing, tried to find the courage to speak, but words felt fragile, inadequate, incapable of capturing the intensity of what she felt, and James, sensing her hesitation, finally spoke, his voice low and trembling. With the same vulnerability she felt, "Lena, I couldn't stay away. I tried to ignore it, but I can't," and the honesty in his tone struck her, a lightning bolt of realization that they both felt the same, that the emotions she had been wrestling with were mirrored, understood, and reciprocated in ways that left her both breathless and overjoyed, and she felt tears prick her eyes, a mixture of relief, excitement, and fear mingling in her chest, and she realized that the bond they had always shared had evolved into something richer, more layered, a delicate, complex intimacy that was both thrilling and terrifying, and James stepped closer again, careful not to overstep, aware of the fragility of the moment, his eyes searching hers for permission, for understanding, and Lena, feeling the surge of courage, nodded slightly, her heart hammering, signaling that she was ready to acknowledge the depth of her own feelings, to accept the complexity of what was happening between them, and in that subtle, silent exchange, a quiet understanding formed, a promise unspoken but profoundly felt. And they moved through the space of the room, hands brushing occasionally, shoulders nearly touching, the warmth between them building, soft and intimate, a tension that was electric yet gentle, and Lena felt her chest expand with the awareness that she was no longer alone in these emotions, that James's presence, his understanding, his acknowledgement, made the unknown feel navigable, filled with potential, and in the rhythm of the rain tapping against the window, in the quiet intimacy of shared space, they began to speak, slowly, carefully, about feelings, about memories, about the unexpected shift that had crept into their lives, their words gentle, almost hesitant, yet carrying weight, resonance, and depth, and Lena found herself sharing thoughts she had never dared voice, thoughts about longing, connection, desire, vulnerability, and James listened with patience, with care, with a tenderness that made her heart ache and swell all at once, and as the night deepened, the room grew darker, but neither noticed, lost in the quiet unfolding of honesty and emotion, and Lena realized that this moment, simple in setting, extraordinary in feeling, was changing everything, that the fragile, tentative steps toward emotional truth and intimacy were transforming the landscape of their bond, the safe familiarity of sibling closeness now tinged with the delicate thrill of something new, tender, and profoundly human, and James, seeing the sincerity in her eyes, the subtle trembling of her hands, the way her voice caught when she spoke, felt his own heart respond, recognizing the courage it took to reveal such vulnerability, and he reached out gently, fingers brushing hers, a touch that was soft yet full of meaning. A small connection that carried the weight of shared understanding and unspoken promise, and Lena felt the warmth spread through her, the electricity, the tenderness, the subtle recognition that this was more than attraction, more than curiosity, more than fleeting emotion. It was the intertwining of hearts, a recognition of shared experience, longing, and the deep emotional intimacy that had always existed but was now illuminated in a new light, and for the first time, she allowed herself to fully feel it, to embrace the depth of her emotions, the complexity of the bond, the delicate tension, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it together, slowly, carefully, honestly, and James, seeing her acceptance, mirrored it, their connection now undeniable, palpable, and the room seemed to hold them in a quiet cocoon of warmth and emotion, the rain outside a gentle soundtrack to the unfolding of a story they had not planned but that felt inevitable, necessary, and right. And as they sat side by side, hands occasionally brushing, sharing thoughts, confessions, laughter, and silence, Lena realized that this unexpected moment, the culmination of days of tension, longing, and subtle recognition, had brought them to a new threshold, a place where vulnerability met trust, desire met understanding, and the bond they shared was transformed, delicate yet unbreakable, fragile yet profoundly real, and James, sensing the depth of their connection, leaned slightly, just enough to close the invisible gap, his eyes soft, full of reassurance, and Lena, feeling the same, responded with a subtle, mirrored movement, a gentle acknowledgement, a quiet promise, and in that mutual understanding, in the shared warmth and unspoken agreement, they discovered that this was the beginning, not the end, of a journey, a slow, careful navigation of emotions, intimacy, and the beauty of opening one's heart fully to another. And as the rain continued to fall, casting rhythmic shadows across the walls, Lena and James sat together, hearts open, aware of the fragility, the intensity, the tenderness of the moment, ready to explore, to grow, to embrace the unexpected depth of feeling that had quietly blossomed between them, a story of longing, connection, trust, and love unfolding softly, intimately, and beautifully, a story that would continue delicately, passionately, honestly, as they stepped forward, together, into the unknown with courage, care, and a shared understanding that nothing would ever be the same again, and that every future moment would be touched by the awareness, the tenderness, the profound intimacy of this night, this rain, this room, this unexpected, unforgettable moment when hearts, long familiar, finally opened fully to one another in a way that was gentle, mature, emotional, and deeply human.